Five seconds, 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2, 1. We're on the air in Q Van.
Tonight, Senator Crocker Jarman faces opponent William McKay, his challenger in the race for the U.S. Senate seat from the state of California. The Jarman-McKay debate. Good evening, I'm Van Amberg, ABC. I'll be your moderator for tonight's debate. We have 3 of California's best-known broadcast journalists on our panel tonight. They are Roland Post, Ken Jones, and Maury Green. We'll begin our questioning now with Maury Green.
Mr. McKay, at the beginning of your campaign, you favored busing to achieve integration in the schools. Lately, you seem to be against it. Which is it, for or against?
Well, we can't let a school bus carry all the burdens of our society. The main problem is still, how do we get a first-rate education for each and every child? We can't afford to have inferior schools anywhere, and we should always try to preserve the concept of the neighborhood school in achieving this.
Gentlemen, is pollution a political issue in this campaign, or is this one subject you both can agree on?
Of course it's not political.
Now, let's look at that oil spill that fouled our beaches. Now, I warned about that oil spill. I testified. I hollered for stronger regulation. But we needed the oil, and we weren't careful enough about how we went in and got it. So I end up in the shower along with everybody else, trying to scrub the oil out of my old gray hair. Now, when it comes to smog, we are bucking the dream of every private citizen in his own automobile. So we had to take on the battle of installing devices. And we are gradually seeing that shift over take effect. In fact, I think we can now say, as a result of our Herculean labors, that we are turning the corner on smog here in California.
Mr. McKay. Well, I don't think we can see the corner, much less turn it. I won't say it's a matter of Republicans or Democrats, but is politics all right when the politicians put the needs of the polluters over the needs of the public? Now, we have the money to do this job. We don't have to raise taxes 1 cent. We just have to have the leadership to get the job done.
Opening up tonight's program of Take Two, it's Don Porter and Robert Redford debating in the motion picture The Candidate, and that kicks off Take Two from Public Radio KCBX. We're glad you're there, and across the aisle from me, wearing his, what are you wearing tonight? Are you...
definitely my striped suit and my nice conservative red tie. I'm behind the podium here.
And that's Bob Whiteford.
And across the aisle from me, looking very dapper in his black tuxedo, towering behind his podium, the incomparable gentleman Jim Dee.
Good to see you, Bob. And before we commence on part 2 of our election 2004 program here on Take Two, I want to make 2 congratulations, one to you, Bob, and to Catherine McDonald, the other 2 of the Take Two trio, for mustering up amazing support for Public Radio KCBX last week during the pledge drive. And the second congratulation to our incredible listeners who contributed their support to KCBX. It's because of you that we're here, and we thank you for your support. The pledge drive does continue for probably a day or 2 on Wednesday to achieve our goal, but thank you, Take Two listeners, for pledging your support to the radio station that will have us.
I echo those sentiments, Jim. Thank you, everybody, for your support during Pledge Drive. We really appreciate it. As I said last week, it's a real honor to be on here and to be serving all of you out there once a week talking about movies. It's a real privilege.
Well, Bob, a few weeks back we did a show. We were in the thick of the year 2004, the election season. It's wild and woolly out there. And as on our previous program, looking at election movies and political films, we touched upon The Best Man, Manchurian Candidate. I can't remember some of the other titles, but we have a whole list of other great movies to turn your attention to during this season. And, in a lot of ways, some of these films, you may be wrapped into the political climate that's happening right now. And to get even a better insight of what's going on, there are some vastly entertaining and worth seeing films that we're going to tell you about on this program that get you more into it. It makes it far more interesting. In fact, as we're listening to the debate from The Candidate, great Robert Redford film, there are things that are as timely as ever. There's also some other things you're saying, well, they're not doing these dirty tricks, or they're not doing these certain things that are apparent in today's political climate. But going back, 32 years or so, was 1972.
Well, that was the year of the ultimate dirty tricks, Watergate, et cetera, et cetera. But Jim, I think The Candidate is a really important political film because it is essentially the first really political film of the early 70s that really kind of changed the way politics was viewed in film. Now, this particular film, I would say it's a vehicle that really established Redford as a star.
Yes.
I think it's the one that really catapulted him beyond such things as Tell Them Willie Boy Was Here and Downhill Racer, where he's a good-looking guy, but this made him a big star. And what's interesting about this film, to put it in the context of the time it was made, it's a battle between the old and the young, the old guard versus the young maverick, which is not an altogether new political battle, as we'll discover in some of the other films we'll talk about. But this put a different face on it, especially for its time, and it still resonates today. Because now you've got television, televised debates. You have, who's great in this film is Peter Boyle.
Yes,
it's kind of like the James Carville, or
yes,
some kind of political management specialist. And for Boyle, this is a fascinating role because it really propels him beyond roles such as Joe, which he was great as the urban redneck.
Yeah, great movie.
Yeah, great movie. Hey Joe. No, I won't. But this shows that Peter Boyle has some great acting chops because he's ultimately very, very convincing in this film. And tip our hats to Don Porter playing the incumbent, old guard, older conservative senator who's the incumbent and facing the challenge of Redford's ideas and his youth. I think he plays his part extremely well. And Don Porter, an actor who, started out in Universal in the 40s.
On TV, wasn't he on My Little Margie?
Well, he originally, in the early 40s, you could see him in such classics as Night Monster with Bela Lugosi and Ralph Morgan. He was also in She-Wolf of London with June Lockhart. In 1951, he was in the film noir classic The Racket with Robert Ryan and Robert Mitchum. And he also, I believe, played Sally Field's dad in Gidget, the TV show. Yeah, I think he might have been in My Little Margie, too. Yeah. I mean, versatile, all over the place.
If you can't picture Don Porter, as soon as you saw him, he's one of the great character actors, and again, and a big career on TV. But he does make a great older candidate up against Robert Redford in The Candidate. The other fascinating thing in this film, Bob, is I think Robert Redford reluctantly enters politics, and he says, I want to do it my way, and I want to have integrity. But what it shows in the film is the machinations of being in politics. You get sucked in, and you're doing stuff that, you may want to scratch your head, or at least with the Robert Redford character in this film. compromises, the integrity going out the window, maybe creating an image that he doesn't particularly like. Let's hear the end of the debate. This is, once again, Don Porter and Robert Redford from the 1972 film.
Okay, ready to fade in.
We come now to our concluding statements. Each candidate will have 1 minute. The order was picked by the flip of a coin, and Senator Jarman will go first. Senator Jarman.
To me, this country was never stronger. But the test of a strong country is how it faces its difficulties. And now and then, when I hear the barking and the baying of those who would knock our system down, I am reminded of the last days of the great Roman Empire. They argued about what vices they could legalize. And what happened was an onslaught that nearly spelled the end of civilization. Now, I am not suggesting that is what will happen if the people do not send me back to the Senate. I just promise you this. I will continue to stand up for the philosophy that has made this nation great and is more than ever called for if we're to face the future with hope and confidence. I have that hope because I believe in America. I believe that our greatest moment is yet to come. Thank you.
Mr. McKay, you now have 1 minute to sum up. Mr. McKay.
In the beginning, I think it's important to note what subjects we haven't discussed. We've completely ignored the fact that this is a society divided by fear, hatred, and violence. And until we talk about just what this society really is, then I don't know how we're going to change it. For example, we haven't discussed the rot that destroys our cities. We have all the resources we need to check it, and we don't use them. And we haven't discussed why not. We haven't discussed race in this country. We haven't discussed poverty. In short, we haven't discussed any of the sicknesses that may yet send this country up in flames. And we better do it. We'd better get it out in the open and confront it before it's too late.
Gentlemen,
Now, just a moment, please.
Gentlemen,
You had to do it, didn't you?
I never dreamed that my opponent would stoop to encouraging violence.
I beg your
I
pardon,
very
Senator.
seriously doubt that any
That's
man
not
who
what I
could do
said.
that
Gentlemen,
is
Get it in there.
Yeah, nothing like a debate that ends up in a free-for-all because Robert Redford kind of broke the rules there.
Yeah, spoke from his heart and wanted to address issues that were real.
As opposed to Don Porter's character, who sort of likens, if you don't vote for me, it'll be like the Roman Empire where everything is going to go to hell.
It's interesting how that ploy still gets used. If you don't vote for me, the world will end or will be attacked or something.
Yeah. It's from a film from 1972, folks, The Candidate. You should check it out. It's a really, really entertaining film. Robert Redford, like you said, at his peak. Not at his peak, maybe peaking. This was post Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, just before The Sting, I believe.
And establishes him as a big star.
Yes. Well, right for the season, that's The Candidate. We're going to move back in time, though, and move forward, going back to a great film, I believe, from 1949, starring Broderick Crawford in one of his greatest roles, really.
Absolutely.
It's a full-blown role for Broderick Crawford. It's called All the King's Men.
And this, I believe he won an Academy Award for this film.
Yes, he
Jim.
did.
And directed by Robert Rawson, who did such films as The Hustler, and They Came to Cordura, amongst others. Classic adaptation of the Robert Penn Warren novel of All the King's Men, and it's kind of a fictional take on maybe the life of Huey P. Long, kind of a rural, good old boy, regular guy, kind of rides his populist regular guy-ness into the corridors of power where his ego gets the better of him and he turns into a monster.
As opposed to The Candidate with Robert Redford, who was probably able to step outside himself and say, I'm kind of compromising here. I'm not doing, because later on in the film, I'm talking about the candidate, Robert Redford realizes that he is compromising some of his values, as opposed to Broderick Crawford in All the King's Men, where he really wants to get in there and he really wants to do things, but then he's not able to step outside himself. It's more the essence of politics kind of corrupts him, and it goes to his head, his
and consumes him whole.
Yes,
destroys everything, his family, himself. He goes for. We were talking about this film before we went on the air. How he starts out as the regular guy populist. He's actually halfway decent.
Yes.
And early in the film, when he first runs for like dog catcher or something, I'm thinking, I'd vote for this guy.
Mm-hmm.
But then somewhere along the line, demagoguery takes over. He panders to the worst in human beings, he panders to the worst in his electorate to advance his own cause, which is himself and his unquenchable lust for power and control. And Broderick Crawford, for folks who are not too familiar with him, he was a great actor, a great presence. A lot of you might remember him from the old Highway Patrol TV series. If you want to give blood, donate it to the Red Cross. Don't leave it on our highways.
Yeah, that's really good, Bob.
Well, thank you.
Well, here's a taste of Broderick Crawford and the corrupting influence of politics. This is a scene where Crawford is being confronted by a father of a girl who's in the hospital due to Crawford's son, who was driving drunk and got into an accident. And, of course, Crawford tries to wield his power. This is from All the King's Men.
Go on upstairs, Lucy. I have some business I want to talk over with Mr. Hale.
What I've got to say, anybody can listen to. Where's your boy?
No, don't get excited. Get me another drink, sugar.
My daughter may die.
She's not going to die. She'll get the best medical attention there is. No expense is going to be spared.
Where's your boy?
I'll get him.
Wait a minute, Lucy. He's asleep, and the doctor said after a good night's sleep he'd be all right.
No. He won't be all right unless you make him all right. I'll get him.
Lucy! Care for a drink?
No, thanks.
Accidents will happen, you know.
Accidents? Your boy was drunk.
I saw the police report. There was nothing about drunkenness on the police report.
Whose police and whose report? I say the boy was drunk, and I know it. Right here before your father, I want
Mr. Hale.
Tom, doctor says you need rest, boy.
I don't want you to try to cover up for me. If it was wrong, that's all there is to it.
You don't know what you're talking about. I saw the police report.
I don't care what the police report says. I was driving and I was drunk. It's all my fault. Anything you want to do to me, you can do. Whatever you want me to do, I'll do.
Nobody has to do anything. Stop worrying. I'll take care of everything.
I don't want you to take care of anything.
Tom, go on upstairs and get some rest, boy. Go on.
Kind of chillingly ironic that there's Broderick Crawford kind of tipsy and, confronting the father of his son's the girlfriend and, drunk driving. Very uncomfortable. And Broderick Crawford, getting into I'll call it sleazy. Here's the sleazy politician that came from, an upstanding guy from the beginning.
Yep, a regular guy.
Yeah.
And I think it should be noted that his son, portrayed by John Derek, fresh off of his star-making vehicle, which was 1949's Knock on Any Door with Humphrey Bogart as pretty boy Nick Romano. And this was his follow-up film. John Derek showed a lot of promise back in those days. Not only was he beautiful, but he had some really good parts. It's kind of interesting that the promise as an actor was never quite fulfilled. He kind of reminds me a little bit of John Agar in the sense that they both jumped out of the gate in the A-list and then kind of went down from there. But this is a great performance from him as the kind of tortured son of the great man Willie Loam. What's his name? I can't.
Huey Long. Huey Long.
Yeah, I don't
think
think
of Death of a Salesman.
I don't think his. Yeah, that's right. Arthur Miller. Please forgive me.
Well, anyway, that was from All the King's Men. I believe it's from 1949, and a really interesting overview of the political process in America, and Broderick Crawford winning an Oscar for his performance. Now, let's segue into Born Yesterday, which is a few years later. I want to say it's 51, 52 or so. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact date. And this more of a satire, a comedy, but we've also got Broderick Crawford starring in almost the same role he was in All the King's Men, but down the road even further, the road of political corruption. And the wonderful Judy Holliday and William Holden. Judy Holliday is Broderick Crawford's main squeeze, shall we call her?
And his bird, his canary.
And in this film, Broderick Crawford, the rather underworld character, doing business with politicians, that sort of murky collaboration between elements of the underworld and the upstanding folks in our government. And William Holden not only is on to Broderick Crawford's shenanigans, but is courting Judy Holliday, who doesn't know anything about politics. In fact, one thing I was thinking about this today, Bob, is one of the issues in this year's political climate in this election year, there's all this talk about non-voters and undecided voters. And I looked at Judy Holliday in Born Yesterday as being, the person who just doesn't think politics touches her. She doesn't know anything about American politics or the law. And during the course of this film, William Holden and Judy Holliday learn about, the Constitution and what makes America what it is, and so on and so forth. And so here's the education of the non-voter or the undecided voter portrayed by Judy Holliday. And I tried to put a current spin on this film from 1952.
And it's a great film, a lot of fun, a wonderful film. In fact, remade over 40 years later, not very well.
Oh.
As often is the case.
When you and Catherine did your Bombshell show, I would say Judy Holliday almost fits the bombshell, or should we, unfortunately we call her, the bimbo or the dumb blonde, but she is so absolutely funny and captivating and charming, and, during the course of the film she gets educated of, what American politics are, and she's incredible.
Tough, but with a certain innocence about her that makes you want to like her, you know, and she, a rare talent, very special actress, very unique. Don't think we'll ever see her like again.
Here's a scene from Born Yesterday. It's William Holden confronting Broderick Crawford on his illegal shenanigans that he's been doing with the government, and Judy Holliday is there as well. This is from Born Yesterday.
If I told you this whole operation is strictly according to law, then I'd say the law needs revision.
Who are you, the government?
Of course.
Since when?
Since 1779, right?
Right. What do you think you've got, Paul? A connection between Harry's Combine and the Congressman's amendment.
All right, but why single us out to make a fuss over it?
Yeah, why?
What we're doing isn't uncommon. It's done every day.
Done every day, that's right. For all I know, there's an undiscovered murder committed every day. And what does that prove? All this undercover pressure, this bribery, corruption, government between friends. Sure, it goes on all the time and it's tough to crack. Just ask me, I've tried for years. You need more than knowing about it. You gotta have facts and figures. And most important, the names.
He's got him.
All right, let's get down to it. What do you take, Paul?
I'll take a drink, please, if I may.
Don't get fancy with me. I ain't met a guy yet that didn't have his price.
I have.
I'm talking about big numbers.
You and your big numbers. You know what, Charlie? You be wearing one across your chest.
I'll get to you later.
That's from Born Yesterday, and I believe this was based on a Broadway play. I think Judy Holliday was also on the stage, and Broderick Crawford, fresh off of All the King's Men from a few years earlier, was perfect for the corrupt underworld fellow who was, playing footsie with politicians.
And let's face it, Broderick Crawford in both of those films reminds us of the old days where it's like a smoky back room, and whatever the problem is, it just will take how much money how much money will it take to fix this? I just happen to have $5,500 in my pocket. Will this take care of it? Broderick Crawford, a guy that probably walked around with so much money he had rubber bands as money clips and was throwing it around.
You know, all three of the films that we're going to be talking about, All the King's Men, Born Yesterday, and our next film, which is actually from the late 50s, I think it's 1959, it's called The Last Hurrah, with the wonderful Spencer Tracy as, an aging politician. And the one thing I was going to mention about all three of these films that struck me in watching them, parts of them the last few days, Bob, is the scenes run on. The writing is fabulous. I mean, there's instead of, cute exchange and then kind of end of a scene and you go to the next scene, in all three of these films, the writing is smart, it's articulate, it really gets into the core of what politics are all about. And, I just forget that. I'm watching these scenes and just the scenes go on and on and on, and the conversation's intelligent, and it's fabulous. We're moving on to The Last Hurrah, and another look at sort of the underside of what politics are all about.
The old guard machine politics of an eastern city. I think in this case Boston. The old Irish machine there, yes, that had been in power probably for a generation or more. And it's starting to wind down. Their man, portrayed by Spencer Tracy, in yet another powerhouse performance later in his career. Might add, the film directed by, of course, the great John Ford.
Yes.
And featuring a lot of the great John Ford players, but not just that, which is always great, but Pat O'Brien is back in an A-list production as Spence is like his best buddy, campaign manager, and chief disperser of favors in his ward to get him reelected. And Jeffrey Hunter playing the like a younger man looking at this going, this is horrible.
Yeah, that's right.
Seeing it from the inside, how it really works. And I think we've got a clip from this that really sums it all up.
Well, Bob, when I was watching this today, I thought of the tragedy of Paul Wellstone when he was killed over the past, couple of years or so it's been. And if our listeners remember, there was a memorial service or something for Paul Wellstone, and the service was accused of being a political rally. And again, how more lousy can you get as far as, I'm talking about the accusation of, perhaps turning a man's funeral into a political rally. But folks, it happens in The Last Hurrah, dated from 1959. Here is a scene with Jeff Hunter and Pat O'Brien, and they've just attended the funeral of a fellow friend. And Spencer Tracy shows up, and of course, what does it turn into? Pretty much a political...
A campaign rally for Spence.
Yes. And as you mentioned, the son, or I believe, is it son or the nephew, or one of... It's a relation of Spencer Tracy, leaves in a huff, portrayed by Jeff Hunter, because it's horrible politics in action. This is a scene from The Last Hurrah.
Adam! Think of getting a bit of fresh air? I'll join you. I know it's none of my business, but you'd be making a mistake to run off like that.
What? Because it might be disrespectful to the deceased? So what do you call this thing anyway? This isn't a wake, it's a political meeting.
Oh, no. It's only natural. After all, there is an election coming up.
Well, maybe so, but, this is Knocko Menahan's wake, and you'd think he'd at least figure in the conversation. Besides, people standing around saying, oh, doesn't Knocko look grand?
Well, it would be the pious thing to do, no doubt. But if you knew Knocko, well, the less said, the better.
Well, he's all that unpopular, then why the turnout?
Well, now, they're here, the most of them, for the same reason as yourself.
Well, I know. I'm here because my uncle brought me here.
That's what I'm trying to tell you.
You mean it's Naco's wake, but it's really my uncle who's the main attraction?
It is.
Yeah, all right. I was right. This is a political meeting. It's just another way of getting votes and using that poor guy's casket as a speaker's platform.
You have things a bit twisty, if you don't mind my saying so, and you're being a bit hard on your uncle.
I don't think so.
Sure, he doesn't have to go to wakes to collect a crowd about him. All he has to do is stop at any street corner and light a cigar, and 50 people come out of the cement and say, "How are you, Frank? What can you do for me today?" And it's for votes. So there's not a man or woman in that house whose vote he hasn't had in his pocket these last 20 years.
All right, if that's true, then why all this?
Well, I'll tell you. Your uncle came here tonight for only one reason. He came to Naco's wake so the widow would feel a little better, thinking about all the friends her husband had. Oh, I'll admit that politics is, well, it's not the most diplomatic thing to discuss. But if it wasn't that, it'd be sports or the high cost of living or something else. Now, you wouldn't want a room full of men to go on talking indefinitely about what a terrible thing death is, now would you?
No, I suppose not.
Good evening, Monsignor. Good evening, John.
That's a scene from The Last Hurrah. Jeff Hunter, Pat O'Brien, smoothing over this rather uncomfortable situation of turning a man's funeral into a political gathering.
And only Pat O'Brien could get away with that.
Oh, he's so smooth. And
he really is.
And I just love you think of a seasoned politician or a seasoned political operative, let's just say, and just how they'll smooth everything over. It's, come on, if we don't want these people talking about death, let's get some votes. Anyway, a great film, also a fantastic performance from Spencer Tracy in The Last Hurrah. We're talking politics and movies on the movie program Take Two. This is Public Radio, KCBX San Luis Obispo, KSBX Santa Barbara. Time for Bob and I to go over to the concession stand. We'll be back with more.
I want to go to the movie store, me and my baby. Come on, let's go. On to the movie show. Let's go. I buy the popcorn as soon as we hit the door. My two brothers Bill and Pons sitting in the front row.
Take Two, the movie program, is sponsored by Smart Systems, expertise focused on the design, sales, and installation of custom music and video systems. Advanced technology for residential and commercial customers since 1984. More at kcbx.org. Funds for this program have also been provided in part by Morin Brothers Automotive, starring Frida, the dog of many alter egos, who is always glad to sniff your tires. Morin Brothers Automotive, on Broad, near Tank Farm Road.
The creature from the Black Lagoon, Red River, color purple. I love the movies. Clark Gable, all the women out there.
We're back on Take Two, the movie program on Public Radio KCBX, and we are glad that you're there. We'll continue our discussion of politics and movies, but we need to give you a few very important announcements of upcoming movie screenings. First, Bob.
First, we have from our friends at the Movie Experience, part of their Mid-60s Madness series, playing at the Fremont in downtown San Luis Obispo tomorrow night at 7 o'clock. We have the Beatles in A Hard Day's Night at the fabulous Fremont. I mean, I've always loved this movie, but on the big screen, this should be quite an event. So pencil it in tomorrow night, folks. If you're in the downtown San Luis Obispo area, 7 o'clock, the Fremont Theater, Beatles Hard Day's Night, part of the Movie Experience Mid-60s Madness series. Highly recommended. we'll make a point every month of mentioning what's playing there from now on, because people need to get out and see these films.
And this announcement for our listeners in Santa Barbara. Of course, you can head down to Santa Barbara to take in, first of all, UCSB Arts and Lectures presenting the great documentary called Control Room. It happens day after tomorrow, Wednesday, October the 6th at 7:30 p.m. at UCSB Campbell Hall. Folks, here's one you also need to mark your calendars for. The Jazz Passengers perform with Creature from the Black Lagoon in shocking 3D, as it says here, for a Halloween treat at UCSB Campbell Hall. It will happen Friday, October the 29th, 8 p.m., and for ticket information on these two films, Control Room on October the 6th and the presentation of Creature from the Black Lagoon in shocking 3D with the Jazz Passengers, that'll be Friday, October the 29th. The number to call, 893-3535.
And if I could, Jim, just a quick mention, we lost the great Janet Leigh today.
Yes.
It happened this morning. She was, in fact, I think we even played a clip from her a few weeks ago. Oh, no, that was Angela Lansbury, but she was in The Manchurian Candidate. Also, of course, the famous shower scene from Psycho and Touch of Evil. And we'll be talking about her career soon.
Yes. Well, we're back talking about politics and film and the idea that in this heated political season, an upcoming election in early November, Bob and I have scoured some great films in order to stay in the mood, get some more insight into what's going on out there, and be really entertained while you're doing so. And we are going to move to another Robert Redford film, this from, I believe, 1976. And easily one of the most prophetic films, and also as timely as ever in the fact that in 3 Days of the Condor, we find that the plot has to do with the intermingling, once again, of government agencies, or the government in general, with big companies and corporations, and also the mixture of the CIA. Within the government itself, there seem to be warring factions. The opening of this film, Robert Redford checking in at work. He works for the CIA. He reads publications from around the world, and his entire staff is murdered. He doesn't know why. And fascinating, fascinating film, Bob. We talked about this film on our spy show a year or two ago, I believe. And it fits in that genre, but I really feel that 3 Days of the Condor fits very well into talking about politics. And once again, the machinations of politics and
big business.
And big business, yes.
And yes, and in fact, we've got a great clip from this film, which is as good as the clip we played from The Spy Show with Cliff Robertson and Robert Redford. That one blew me away.
We can talk about that after we talk about
this. This is really something.
Yes. Here's to set it up from 3 Days of the Condor. Robert Redford is facing a CEO, a big business guy, and he's trying to figure out what his involvement with the government was. Listen closely to this clip from 3 Days of the Condor.
Who are you? What are you doing here? I'm Condor. Sit down. What do you do for a living? Don't be ridiculous. What do you do? Exactly. Deputy Director of Operations. What section? Middle East. What are you working on? What are you doing? What's the secret worth murdering everybody at the ALHS house? There's no secret. Wick showed you my report. What report? Yes. It was your network I turned up. Doing what? Doing what? What does operations care about a bunch of goddamn books? A book in Dutch. A book out of Venezuela. Mystery stories in Arabic. Wait, what the hell is so important about... Oil fields.
Oil. That's it, isn't it? This whole damn thing's about oil. Wasn't it? Wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Well, we've given out the secret to 3 Days of the Condor, but how about that plot, Bob? It's, you know, it's the government getting together with big business to go to the Middle East to, you know, exploit the oil fields. Boy, original idea.
How topical. And that film's almost 30 years old.
Amazing.
Yeah, truly. Way ahead of its time. A visionary film.
Yeah. It was, again, boggling my mind when I was watching this today, Bob. Just where did they get the information? Was this? I assume this was happening back then in one way, shape, or form, or was it fiction at the time, or was it, you know, interesting? There's also, as you mentioned, while the clip was playing, Cliff Robertson plays a great role in this. In fact, one of the great lines in this film, Robert Redford says, he thinks there's a CIA within the CIA. There's all these departments, and they're, you know, who knows who's working for who and what's happening. It's this labyrinth of agencies within agencies.
Well, you know, Jim, as I think about this, historically, I believe 3 Days of the Condor came out after the first oil embargo, which took place maybe during the Yom Kippur War. Late 1973. And I think there was an elevated consciousness to what was going on in the Middle East, not just politically between the, at that time, Israel fighting Egypt and Syria in a conventional war, but the undercurrents, which meant oil and the despotic regimes and the PLO and terrorism, that was very active even back then. And I think this may have been, I believe this was written by Richard Condon, who wrote Manchurian Candidate. I might be wrong, but I suspect that he did write this.
Yeah. There's also a great, it might have been the quote that you mentioned that we use on our spy show, Bob, was Cliff Robertson just simply talking about the realities of taking care of the American people, where he just says, what happens when, you know, their houses go cold and they need the oil to heat their houses? What happens when their cars don't run? And he just says, they're not going to care how we get this oil. They're just going to want us to get it for them. And it's a very chilling moment because he's telling this to Robert Redford, and Robert Redford is looking at the offices of the New York Times and talking about going there and spilling the beans on this whole nasty business. And I'm telling the whole movie, unfortunately, but it gets into also what place the media has in all this, and it's a great ending to the film.
Well, it's interesting, Jim, because once again, Redford is kind of a kind of an innocent that is thrust into this situation, very similar to The Candidate. You know, in this film, he's thrust in by an act of violence, murder. And the other film, he's kind of an idealist that's pushed into this run against the old guard incumbent senator. And his idealism runs smack into the cold-blooded reality of geopolitics. And it makes for an interesting film.
Oh, I really think it holds up well, and it's so, what am I saying? The looking ahead to the future, you know, it's almost vision. Well, like you said, visionary.
Yeah, way ahead of its time.
And all these films, Bob, and, you know, I'm reflecting on, you know, the nature of politics. It's like you've got this little canoe or this boat, and you're going into this torrent of a river, man. You got to just hang on, because that's the nature of it. Just you get swept up, and you've got to go with it the best you can.
And you got to be tough because the attacks are coming from every angle.
Yes.
I mean, Karl Rove didn't invent this.
Yes.
This is the American politics, especially the higher up you go, gets pretty dirty.
Yes.
You know, Gore Vidal wrote about it. The Best Man and Advise and Consent are full of all kinds of backroom hardball tactics. And, yeah, it's not new. This is how it's done here. I mean, in Europe, it's done some other way, but this is how it happens here.
We got one more film to talk about, and I'm not sure the date on Path to War, Bob. But
2002.
2002. And here's a film that talks about the lead up to the Vietnam War.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also timely. It's been a timely subject in this year's election and the campaign. But also I think it's very reflective of the fact that in 2004, we're talking about the lead up to the Iraq War and looking at how that all came about. In this film, you know, I'll say I haven't seen the whole film, but I was really fascinated with what I saw of Path to War.
This is a film, Jim, I think we've touched upon it a few times on the show in the past, and this is a great clip you have lined up here. This was the last film done by the great John Frankenheimer. He did the HBO, and what it deals with, basically, it's Lyndon Johnson, played by the wonderful Michael Gambon, and his Secretary of Defense, McNamara, played by Alec Baldwin, in what I must say is a bravado performance. Baldwin really nails it. And it's the fly on the wall, watching Johnson, McNamara, the wise men, you know, all the George Ball and Clark Clifford, etc., sitting down, trying to figure out, Walt Rostow, how this happened, how they formulated policy, how it started to get out of control, and you know, and then ultimately they're confronted with a situation that is way beyond anything they thought. They totally underestimated the ability of the enemy to resist. They didn't comprehend him. Also, they shut down any voices that did know, which is quite interesting as well. You know, a little bit of conceit and ego, or an inability to admit one has made a mistake. Sounds familiar. We've been here before, and I'm not just talking in the battlefields. In the corridors of power of our government, the same kind of situation existed in 1964 and 65 that existed in 2002 to present in Washington, D.C., in the White House. And this film is a great example.
Well, what I watched in Path to War today, Bob, was really fascinating, the fact that they were really dissecting what an involvement in Vietnam was all about. I mean, just what it would take and just the detailed discussions. And we can play this clip now. This is from The Path to War, John Frankenheimer's last film, and the discussion in, I guess, either in the Pentagon or the White House was the enemy of the Viet Cong and exactly what type of enemy they were going to face. This is from Path to War.
An entire generation of North Vietnamese have been born and lived and died in the pursuit of one thing: a united Vietnam under communist rule. The North Vietnamese have never known anything but war. At CIA, we've just completed a study of their staggering recuperative abilities. Bridges. This one was knocked out in a morning raid. 2 hours later, some bamboo planks across a bunch of wooden canal boats, and there's foot traffic again. By 3 p.m., it's a pontoon bridge, strong enough for a fully loaded truck. A bomb knocks out a rail line. They call up the bicycle brigades. 500 men and women, some as old as 70 or 75, put the cargo on their bikes. Each one balances up to a 600-pound load across the frame, They wheel it across a jerry-rigged bridge to another train waiting to move it on south. Filling a bomb crater to make a road passable again. That's as routine to a school kid there as getting a malt down at the corner shop here. It's a first date.
They have a brand of cigarettes, Mr. President, called Bien Bien Phu. That's their Yorktown, their Waterloo, where they defeated the French in '54.
Reminders of war are in the most casual moments of daily life. In a smoke, Mr. President. They're heroes. The kid who was put to death for trying to assassinate Secretary McNamara last year in Saigon. There's a song about him. It's a top 10 hit.
Now they know they're in big trouble. Because if you think about it, Jim, especially after seeing Fog of War, we know a few things. One, Lyndon Johnson was an old-school politician of the Broderick Crawford school from All the King's Men and Born Yesterday. Where there were problems, it would be, let's throw a little money at it. Let's build them some roads. Let's build them some schools and hospitals. What's their price to stop fighting? And on the other hand, you have Robert McNamara as defense secretary. He's like a human IBM machine. It's all about numbers and figures, body counts, amount of bomb tonnage expanded, mathematically figured by the number of sorties. And both of them, in their separate ways, realize, or that it's just starting to dawn on them, that they're up against something they cannot comprehend, which is the will to resist. Mm-hmm. And it goes beyond all the money Lyndon Johnson can throw at it, and it goes beyond every bomb Robert McNamara can drop on them. They're in trouble, and they know it.
Bob, you're eloquent. That was great. What I get from that clip, too, and what you're saying, is here is America the superpower. And the superpower gets completely derailed by the will of the people. It's we can, as you said, we could drop as many bombs as we want. We can have all this artillery, whatever it may be. The will of the people, whoever we're going up against, whether it's the Vietnamese, whether it's the Iraqis, it seems that the will of the people is the most powerful force. And they're recognizing in this clip from this film, it seems, that the will...
And unfortunately, too late, because we're already deeply embroiled in the conflict at this point, that we finally get a sense of what we should have known, or probably was available to them, but they chose not to listen to that. They thought that their ways would overcome that, and now they found out that isn't going to work.
Yeah. And it's great that you mentioned the Fog of War too, Bob, because
Absolutely.
This is the Errol Morris documentary on Robert McNamara. He's speaking throughout the film, and he's talking about the Vietnam War. If you really would like to, really dive into the build up to the war, what the war was all about, and the political climate around it, check out Path to War, the last film by John Frankenheimer, and The Fog of War from Errol Morris. I mean, what an amazing 1-2 punch as far as just getting a quick education on what it was all about, at least politically speaking.
You know what's fascinating about The Fog of War, Jim? I know we've talked about this film many times, is that McNamara realized that culturally we knew virtually nothing about the Vietnamese people until it was way too late, and even then we couldn't fathom. It's like if you don't understand their culture and who you're doing battle with, you cannot anticipate what they're going to do and what their strengths and weaknesses are. It seems common sense to try and, quote-unquote, know your enemy, and in that case, they decidedly did not. And it seems like history is repeating itself once again.
Yeah.
Amazing.
And as you're mentioning that, Bob, too, I mean, there's a trilogy here. You could get Path to War, Fog of War. And then aren't they reissuing Hearts and Minds, the documentary about the Vietnam War, which really gets down to the nitty-gritty, also the war profiteering. We've mentioned that on our documentary program. And, folks, there's lots of great films out there to really get informed of what was going on back in the 60s during the Vietnam War and parallel it to what's going on today.
Well, you know what's interesting, Jim? What I'm seeing in my end of the movie business, especially in the last few weeks, and it is accelerating is the amount of politically themed, politically fueled documentaries coming out on DVD. It's unprecedented. I mean, of course, there's Unprecedented, the film. That's the title of one of them. But I've never seen anything quite like this. I mean, Fahrenheit 9/11 is coming out tomorrow. But that's it. Granted, that's the granddaddy of them all. But there's a ton of them. Hunting of the President, the far right's assault on Bill Clinton when he was president, Bush's Brain, the story of Karl Rove. Oh, my goodness. Unconstitutional. Oh, my God. Control Room is coming out. I believe Upriver, there's a documentary about John Kerry, which is coming out at the same time it's being released in the theaters. I've never seen this happen before, but there's a deluge of stuff coming out.
The question I would have, Bob, is this the year of the documentary, or the past few years, all these documentaries coming out. But I'm curious why Hollywood is shying away from making a 3 Days of the Condor or a Last Hurrah. I think traditionally, films made in Hollywood, or let's just say fictionalized accounts of these things, don't do well at the box office.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking maybe the one that did it, well, 3 Days of the Condor, I think, was a hit. Another Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman film, All the President's Men, was a big hit. But I think for the most part, of course, I'm looking at Born Yesterday. That was a big hit. Of course, we're going back to the early 50s.
That was a comedy, too. So that would... You know what's interesting, too, just to very quickly, David O. Russell came out with a documentary that was going to be included in the Three Kings special edition, and it had to do with Iraq War veterans and going back to Iraq after the current war and meeting up with some of the people that were in the film, 7 years later. And the people at Warner Brothers decided not to include it in the special edition. It inevitably will be released by the same people who did Unprecedented and Uncovered and Bush Family Fortunes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of interesting as well. I don't know what's up with that. Warner claims no politics. I find that kind of interesting.
Well, from the film guys, let's just go over, check out The Candidate, also All the King's Men, Born Yesterday, The Last Hurrah, 3 Days of the Condor, Path to War. The other titles we mentioned, of course, these are Hollywood films, and the deluge, as you mentioned, of documentaries coming out to broaden your horizons, to be entertained, and to be informed. There's a lot out there in this political year of 2004. Want to thank you for listening. Want to thank Hank, the projectionist extraordinaire. Bob, you always rock, and great talking about these political films in this political climate that we're in.
Absolutely, and I want to send a special take two here, Accountant Hank. Best wishes and get well soon to Dara and Patty.
Thank you, Bob. We'll be back again next week. Thank you for listening to Take Two, the movie program.